ladies and gentlemen, you're going to find out that the theme to this week is basically, I book all my friends. They're all pros, they're great guys. You're about to be one right now. He has a world-class poster collection. He's a world-class corporate magician. He has an obsession for a particular woman magician. Right now, Charles Greene is going to talk about his upcoming book about Ionia, the goddess of mystery.
About Ionia. Now, Ionia was a mother, a daughter, a sister, an inventor, a restaurateur, a landowner, a businesswoman, and eventually a resident of the French Riviera. Perhaps you know something about it. And if not, there is a book coming out, and we're going to tell just a bit of her story tonight. And the reason why it's a bit is I had to find some way of doing this in a small amount of time, and so I thought I would start at the place that everyone knows. And that place is in a letter that is in the archives in a deep, rich cabinet in Hull, England. In that deep, rich cabinet, there is a letter between two businessmen who deal in the arcane, the unknown. They are magical entrepreneurs. And the one is writing a letter to the younger, and in the bit of the margin on the back page, because maybe a bit more space, the writer, the author, writes a little postscript. My daughter, who was Ionia, was in Moscow when the revolution commenced. All materials pillaged. She was in cellar of hotel for 3 months. Besides the images of Ionia, the posters that we know of, the 11 that we know of today, and this quote, and a few more reviews, that's all we really know until soon. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock this postscript. I'm going to focus exclusively on it because it tells us so much more about her life and what she was doing. Ionia was many things. She actually invented, before the 1900s, the change bag. Something that everyone in here knows of and has probably used in one incarnation or another. She is my daughter. That is how the postscript starts. Well, whose daughter? She is the daughter of Charles de Vere, a magician who was born in 1843. He had a shop in England. He had shops in Brussels. He was an entrepreneur of great excellence at the time. Eventually, he moves over to Brussels, and that is where Clementine, that is Ionia's name, Clementine, or as she was known in France, Clementine de Vere was born in Brussels, and she was the 8th child of Charles de Vere and Julia Ferrett. Now, Charles de Vere and Julia Ferrett. Julia Ferrett is her mother. Her mother is also known by another name for most people. It is Okita. Okita is here in her dress of Japanese style. She is with her daughter. This is Carrie, who's born Carolyn. This is not Clementine. Julia Ferrett and Charles de Vere had 8 children, but they were never married. But they had 8 children. They are the people who birthed Ionia. But who was Ionia? Her real name was Clementine de Vere. Up until the article in Stan Allen's Magic magazine, no one knew her real name until 2006. It had been buried in the archives. This is when she is very, very young. She's approximately 14 years here, performing in 1903 for a British embassy event. Now, this is a young woman who has lion cubs. It was the mic drop of its day. This picture was featured in an international magazine, as well as newspapers all around France. It also ran with a story about what was taking place and who was there. This is an event sponsored by the British ambassador because the De Veres, Julia, Charles, their family, they were British, very British. Even though they lived in Brussels, even though they spent most of their life in Paris, they were British, and English was their home language, and they practiced their faith, their life, in British style, and they were members of the British Embassy Church in Paris, which still does exist and holds many records of the De Vere family. That shot that you saw is when she's performing in 1903. The lion cubs were provided to her by a gentleman who worked for the Bostock Circus, a circus that was internationally known. The star lion tamer of that show was Herman Whedon. Herman Whedon was 27 when he delivered those cubs to the 15-year-old Clementine de Vere. Several months later, the two were married. He was 27, she was 15 and a half, categorized as a spinster. Just the way it was in those days. They were married in May of 1904, and then they took off. They left Paris and they went on his schedule where he had worked. With the Bostock Circus, it left them around Paris and around the continent, but then they also came to America. So Clementine came to America with her husband. He was a star lion tamer. At one point, she actually goes into the ring with him and does a portion of the act. This is documented and it happened in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Now, she goes on beyond that because then eventually they do have a child. She stays home in Paris with the child. Eventually, that's in 1907. Eventually, she starts to do some performing. It is on her own accord in an animal act with different kinds of animals. No magic whatsoever. Yet she comes from a highly prestigious magic family. But she doesn't do any magic. She starts working with a woman named Elise. Now, the Elise that she works with is not her sister Elise. It is Elise Leslie, who's an Australian who came to Paris to work at the Folies Bergère in 1900. So it's Miss Elise and Miss Clementine who are working together. And soon she changes her name to Miss Ionia. This is a picture from about 1909, and it's one of the postcard pictures that she did a studio sitting for. Altogether, there are approximately 12 or so photographs that are similar to this, where there's not magic involved whatsoever, but they're simply photograph shots that were used for postcards and different things. This is moving on a little later. This is one of the advert posters for pictures for when she's about to come to the United States, but that does not happen. She was supposed to come to Broadway at the Folies Bergère Theater in New York City. That theater closed down soon after it opened, and her acts were canceled. So she had to find new bookings, and she did. Her husband, at that point, had moved on to Vienna, where he was the managing director for the Ronacher Theater in Vienna, Austria. Because of that, she was able to spend almost a year in Vienna, working first at the Kaisergarten, then the Summer Garden Theater, and then she moves on to the very prestigious, the best theater in Vienna, the Ronacher, where her husband is the managing director. She's there for the last 2 months of 1912. And she's in the papers nearly every single day. So as you go through the archives, you can see it's Ionia here, Ionia, 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 Ionia. She's very famous and very publicized in the city itself. If you look at the program, she's got her picture in the paper, or a picture in the program, prominently displayed. She is a star in Vienna. She goes toward what would be her end of performing. She's in Sweden, performing at a theater just about 40 miles north of Stockholm. And then in Sweden, while she's there, she gives a full interview. This is a picture that accompanies that interview in the paper. It's one of the last pictures that we know of Ionia herself as a performer. After this, she goes from Sweden down to Prague, and that seems to be where she ends her career. In Prague, in August of 1913. After that point, she then goes on to Paris. Now, just to clarify, she's only been performing for a very short period of time in magic. She starts off with a debut of her magic act, the act that her father created in October of 1910, and then goes on to 1913, where she ends her career in Prague. So only magic for about 3 years or so. Before that, she was performing, but it was an animal act with no magic whatsoever. She then goes on to Moscow. So now, how did she get to Moscow? She leaves Prague, she goes to Paris, she's at home among family, she has a son. What was she doing in Moscow? It's a very interesting tale, because she meets somewhere along the road this man. His name, as she gave it, was Prince Vladimir Aristavy Chicherin. He was a prince from the old country. Well, he actually was no prince whatsoever, unfortunately. What he made up for in title, he must have had lots of charm. He spoke several languages, and he was a cosmopolitan kind of guy. He takes Clementine and her son to Russia through Germany. At this point, it's before World War I, and Germany and Russia share a border. There's no Poland, there's no other countries in between. They share a border. So they go from Germany, spend a little bit of time there, then go into Russia. In Russia, what do? Well, they do some amazing things. And this is an example of the timing, because this story is buried in archives in different governments. United States government, the Russian government, the French government, the British government. There are things that are buried in MI files in Britain. There are things that are buried in German files from the Nazi era. All these things are buried, and they're being collected and put in one place. This is one of those items. This is an emergency passport application for Clementine as she's wanting to go from Paris, France, to Russia. And she gives the explanation of wanting to do that in May of 1914. And she gets to Russia. She's got amazing timing. She gets to Russia just before the start of World War I, which you know happens in June. Well, it's the assassination that happens in June. Then the war is actually declared in July of 1914, and let's just say all heck breaks loose. At this point, she's in Russia. And what does she do in Russia? She's there to stay. She's setting up camp. She's not doing magic. One of the things she does is to move with her son to an area outside of Russia, and she buys land. She buys a piece of land, an estate that is approximately 1,200 acres of land. 1,200 acres of land. Today, if she were to buy that, that would be $2.1 million. She buys this land and lives there for several months. Eventually, she sells the land, goes to some other places in Russia, then buys another piece of land that's closer to Moscow, and that land is smaller in size, approximately 620 acres, but she buys it for what would be today $2.6 million. How does the daughter of two magicians and the magician herself find that kind of money? Well, it's simple. She has connections. And those connections are familial connections. Her sister, we know Elise, her real name is Constance Elise de Vere, in 1905 marries Frank Godsoll. Frank Godsoll, as you will remember, is a multimillionaire. And he started off as a multimillionaire in the early 1900s through buying movie theaters all around Europe, Germany, Italy, and other places. He had at least 20 different movie theaters on the continent. And he was making money through essentially commission sales. After that, approximately 1909, he starts importing pearls that are imitations. He says that they're imitations. But he dazzles women with marketing. And he has stores on the main streets of Paris, London, Berlin, and New York. They're called Technical Pearls, and they still exist. He's making money hands over fist. And this is one of his business partners is Cyril de Vere. Again, one of the de Vere children, which is why Cyril de Vere leaves his father's magic shop in approximately 1905, and he goes to work for Frank Godsoll. Lots and lots of money is being made. He is a money-making dynamo. Money is not an object to him, and he is the one who funds the lifestyle of Charles de Vere, the family, and Clementine de Vere. Perhaps, this is not known, but perhaps to set up a base for business later on in Russia. But of course, things change in Russia because revolution is in the air. In 1917, in February, there's the revolution. The Bolsheviks uprise. The people rise up against the Tsar. In the next month, the Tsar abdicates the throne. 300 years of Romanov dynasty is just thrown out the window. It's upheaval. Then there's the October Revolution of 1917, when literally there is a civil war in Russia between the white army that's over in the east and the red Bolsheviks, which are based out of Moscow. Everything becomes nationalized by the Bolsheviks, who are situated in Moscow. Lenin comes back into town in April of 1917. This is the revolution that is changing, and what will change, literally the world. And Clementine is there. Now, she doesn't really know what to do, but she's doing the best she can in a revolutionary situation. So, just as Lenin is coming to town, she goes to the bank, Credit Lyonnais, French bank, and she deposits her materials. 3 different materials in 3 different caskets, different numbers, and she deposits 26 items for which there is an inventory, and she puts them in storage for 6 months with an option to have them there for another 6 months. The total of those items is $500,000. Now these are icons, jewelry, furniture, not small furniture, pictures, different various things, but it's a fair amount of money. But they're in storage. This is the place where some of the items are kept. Because later, as she's about to leave, perhaps, in November of 1918, 580 items are placed in this building. This building is the home of the Prince, Vladimir Chicherin-Eristavi, and Clementine de Vere. It's their home. The items are placed in the basement. But as certain things reveal, the Prince has total control, power of attorney, to operate on her name. So what happens is, he collects all of these items, he has an inventory, he has them marked, he has the place sealed, and they are in there. This is all documented. And they're placed in this building, which was their former home. During this time, Clementine is now in the hotel. She's in the National Hotel in downtown Moscow, across from the Kremlin. Now, some people thought, well, she's probably like hell there. But maybe not. Maybe it was the safest place for her to be. Because the National Hotel was the headquarters for the Red Bolshevik Army. At a time, Leon Trotsky lived there, and Lenin stayed there for a while the Kremlin was being renovated. So this was like the safest place that one could probably be if you were on the side of the Reds. And this was also probably arranged by Vladimir Eristavi Chicherin, who worked for the Bolshevik Army. Finally, this is the key. How do we know all of this stuff? This is not in any magic journal. Well, a few bits of time ago, before we all got locked down, there was an announcement made of a sale in New York City. There are certain papers that are available. They are linked to a woman who is a magician named Ionia. The papers are Russian, French, and English. And they relate to a time between 1916 and 1918. These are those papers. It's a portfolio of approximately 70 different documents. Financial documents, power of attorney documents. These documents are the Rosetta Stone for Clementine's postscript, her father's postscript. They unlock it all. Because, fortunately, the original documents in Russian are there, but also there's a French translation that happened in 1928 by the bank Credit Lyonnais. There are fortunately a few passages and pages that are also in English. So, putting them all side by side, we were able to find all of this information. So, my daughter, who was Ionia, she was many different things. Mother, daughter, sister, wife. She was a landowner, an inventor, a model, an animal tamer, entrepreneur, many different things. Eventually, she comes back to Paris, and she marries the prince, and they're married for several years. During that time period, in the 20s, Clementine had a restaurant called Usada Russe in the heart of Paris. The restaurant was directly across from the Élysée Palace. If you walked out the door, you looked across, you saw into the entryway of the palace. That restaurant was there for more than 10 years. It was a hotbed of activity, not only for the Russians who were streaming into Paris, who were fleeing from Moscow during the time of the Civil War, but also for Bolshevik activity and other activities, spy activity, and a lot more going on, which is why Clementine de Vere winds up in the official files of MI5 and the Nazi files and the deep German files, deep French files as well. But that's what she's involved in. Eventually, in 1955, after leaving a huge estate in Paris in Neuilly, where she's there with a few dogs named Pat and Betty, she leaves. She retires. She goes to the most elite of the elite places, Saint-Jacques-Cap-Ferrat in the French Riviera. And she lives in this house. The time was called Villa Lumia. After she lived there for 18 years, she passed in 1973. After that time, the house is called Villa Clementine. There are many things that we still do not know. A book is being written. I appreciate your time, and I am most grateful to the many, many people who have inspired me, many of them who are in this room, and also to the many people who have shared bits of information with me, photographs, and notes from their own personal collections. Thank you very much.